Okay, let's unpack this. We are tackling, well, probably the greatest, most pressing challenge of the current era. It's this explosive, transformative power of artificial intelligence, and it's colliding head-on with two massive, immovable objects: finite planetary resources on one hand, and the stability of our social and economic structures on the other. We've amassed a pretty significant stack of sources here today. We're looking at cutting-edge energy projections, really detailed labor forecasts, some deep theories of ecological economics, and even high-level geopolitical scenarios. Our mission isn't just to, summarize these facts. It's a proper deep dive into how these forces interlock and, frankly, how they're dictating the future of human society. The central paradox we see emerging right away is pretty stark. AI offers these tools for breathtaking green solutions, can help us optimize electricity grids, dramatically accelerate the discovery of new, efficient materials, manage complex systems better than we ever could. But, and this is the big but, its sheer infrastructural demand threatens to negate those very gains. So we have to figure out, is AI genuinely positioned to be our environmental savior? Or is it actually set to become our immediate energy monster?
And what's fascinating here, really, is that the answer seems to be yes to both of those scenarios, almost simultaneously. It depends entirely on the political will, the infrastructure choices we make globally over, say, the next 5 to 10 years.
Right.
We are truly at an inflection point. The technological momentum of AI development is, well, it's dramatically outpacing our policy frameworks and, crucially, our physical infrastructure capacity. We really need to conduct a complete systems analysis today, looking at three interlocking factors. First, the intense physical cost of running these ever more sophisticated algorithms. Second, the dramatic structural shift that this causes in the global job market. And finally, how these two forces together challenge our fundamental assumptions about perpetual global economic growth and globalization itself.
All right, let's start there then. Section 1, the energy equation. When algorithms get hungry.
Okay, so to start with the fundamental physical reality, the scale and the acceleration of AI's energy demand are, well, they're truly unprecedented. We're not talking about marginal increases here. The sheer computing power required for training these large language models, for deploying generative AI, for managing cloud services, it's driving an explosive nonlinear rise in the energy consumption of data centers globally.
You mentioned a core data point earlier that I think most people might just gloss over: the current scale.
Hmm.
What is that scale, and why should we pay attention if it still seems, relatively small today?
Right. So we have estimates that AI-related energy consumption in data centers reached about 20 terawatt hours, or TWH, in 2025. Now, you're right. 20 TWH on its own is only about 0.02% of total global energy consumption right now. Seems tiny. But that number is a red alert because it represents the beginning of the exponential curve. Most energy systems, frankly, were just not designed to handle a sudden, massive new category of demand that is growing this fast.
And that's exactly the key, isn't it? It's the trajectory, not the starting point. Our sources are projecting that total data center energy use could double or even triple by 2030. That's just 5 years from now. If that projection holds true, we are talking about energy needs that would surpass the current consumption of entire industrialized nations, potentially exceeding the energy appetite of countries like Germany, maybe even India.
Exactly. Think about that. The global energy system, which is already struggling, right, to decarbonize and meet existing population needs, now has to accommodate the equivalent of adding another major nation's entire electrical grid demand within half a decade, purely for digital infrastructure.
Wow.
And that acceleration isn't uniform either. The demand spike is driven by two main things. Training these models, which is incredibly energy intensive. It can require weeks or months of nonstop processing on thousands of specialized chips. And then there's inference, which is basically every time a user, like you listening now, makes a query to an AI.
Okay, so let's zoom in on that. From the macro level of data centers down to the micro level of a single human action, that single query. The inefficiency really hits home there, doesn't it? I think everyone sort of assumes asking an AI a question is as cheap energy-wise as, say, sending an email or doing a quick Google search.
Oh, far from it. That's where it gets truly resource-intensive. A single AI query, whether you're generating an image, asking ChatGPT to summarize a document, running a complex simulation, whatever it is, it might use up to 10 times more electricity than a standard internet search. Now imagine the billions, literally billions, of searches conducted globally every day. If you shift even just 10% of those over to AI queries, well, you get a massive and immediate demand spike on the grid.
10 times more. That's
Yeah.
staggering. And the domestic impact in developed nations is already being forecasted, frankly, alarming levels.
Yeah.
If you look specifically at the United States, some experts are predicting that U.S. data centers could consume as much as 25% of national electricity by 2030. That is a staggering leap from around 4% today.
25%. It's not just a high number. It means electricity generation, transmission, distribution. Suddenly, it becomes dominated by one single industrial need, serving the AI economy. To put that in context, 25% is roughly the amount of electricity currently used by the entire residential sector of the U.S., or potentially more than the combined consumption of major industries like manufacturing and transportation. The whole system has to fundamentally transform just to accommodate this AI boom.
And this demand shock, it has to be met somehow, right? Which means immediate global consequences for energy markets.
Exactly. Now, the major tech companies, they are making strong public commitments, to power their data centers with 100% renewables. And that's good, but the sheer speed and scale of this demand mean they just can't build the solar and wind farms fast enough right now. It's a physical impossibility in the short term. So our sources indicate that in the short term, much of this new capacity will inevitably have to be generated by the quickest, most readily deployable sources, which, let's be honest, often means natural gas. And if natural gas usage increases even modestly to meet this escalating demand, and we are talking potentially tens of billions of cubic meters, we could actually see a measurable, sustained global price increase in natural gas. This means the AI demand shock immediately trickles down. It could potentially raise heating and electricity bills for ordinary consumers, people like you, worldwide.
So we're walking this sustainability tightrope, and the danger sounds, well, catastrophic if we get it wrong. If we fail to manage this demand surge with a massive synchronized clean energy deployment, AI's hunger could undermine critical global climate goals almost single-handedly.
The climate cost is brutal, potentially. If the increased AI energy use is met predominantly by carbon-intensive sources, it could add a frightening 1.7 gigatons of co-Euro emissions worldwide just between 2025 and 2030. To truly grasp that scale, 1.7 gigatons, that's roughly the total collective emissions of every single Italian person, every factory, every car, every power plant in Italy during that same 5-year period.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And if you consider the intense global effort required just to stabilize current emissions, adding another 1.7 gigatons just for AI infrastructure, it represents a massive regulatory and environmental setback. It makes the task of reaching net zero exponentially harder.
Okay, that sounds like a complete disaster scenario.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the paradox earlier that AI simultaneously presents the opportunity to be the solution. How does that work?
This is the hope, right? And it's a powerful one. What's fascinating and slightly ironic is that the same computational power that demands all this energy can also be the most effective tool we have for mitigating its own damage, and maybe even solving legacy environmental problems. For example, AI systems can manage complex electricity grids with far greater predictive efficiency than human operators ever could. They can balance intermittent solar and wind sources to minimize waste, prevent blackouts. That's huge. Furthermore, AI is genuinely accelerating the discovery of efficient materials and better battery chemistries. By running billions of simulations, AI can identify optimal materials for high-capacity batteries or even for carbon capture discoveries that would take traditional labs maybe decades to find.
So the technology is both the cause and the potential cure. Given that, what is the non-negotiable policy response needed right now?
The necessity is immediate, and it has to be global. We need massive investments starting now. And this isn't just about building more solar panels or wind turbines. It's about radically strengthening grid infrastructure, enabling faster, more efficient power distribution to handle these new load centers, the data centers. It also means seriously exploring stable, low-carbon baseload options like advanced nuclear energy to balance this rising energy use with our sustainability imperatives. We simply cannot allow the technological momentum of AI to outpace the physical and policy infrastructure required to run it cleanly. If we don't pay the infrastructure price now, believe me, we will pay a much higher environmental and economic price later.
Okay, that's a stark warning on the energy front. Let's move to Section 2 then. The job market shockwave, displacement creation, and the huge mismatch. If Section 1 was about how AI impacts the planet and our power grid, Section 2 is really about the immediate personal impact on you listening, your career, your security, your future income.
Yeah, and the economic consensus here is pretty clear. Automation, driven by AI, is expected to raise overall productivity. That could lead to potential societal benefits like, cheaper goods and services. However, the sources are also brutally honest. This transition will dramatically exacerbate existing inequality, and it's going to require global, painful, and very expensive reskilling efforts.
Here's where the numbers initially sound maybe a bit optimistic, but they seem to mask a deep structural problem. Forecasts suggest this massive upheaval. Maybe 85 to 92 million jobs could be displaced globally by 2030. But concurrently, maybe 97 to 170 million new opportunities might be created. On paper, that looks like a huge net gain, so why isn't that just straightforwardly good news?
Well, that net gain figure is highly misleading. It looks positive on a macro spreadsheet, absolutely. But the crucial warning from all the analysis is that these new jobs are structurally very different. They are not one-to-one replacements for the jobs lost. The person who loses a job in, say, routine accounting or data entry is almost never qualified to immediately step into a new job as an AI prompt engineer or data compliance specialist. The chasm, the gap between the skills of the displaced workers and the skills required for these newly created roles is immense, and that creates a profound and immediate structural skill mismatch across the entire economy.
Let's talk specifics then. Which job categories are facing the highest risk right now, according to the data?
Studies suggest a massive risk exposure across the board. Something like 47% of U.S. workers are potentially at risk of full or partial task automation in the next decade. We can kind of define the highest risk categories by their reliance on routine, repetitive, and administrative tasks. For instance, customer service representatives. They face up to an 80% automation risk by 2025. That's practically tomorrow. And this isn't just about simple chatbots anymore. We're talking highly sophisticated large language models capable of handling complex queries, disputes, follow-ups. We're already seeing millions of these positions transitioning to advanced automated systems.
80% by 2025, that transition speed is terrifying. Clerical and administrative roles must be similarly vulnerable given their reliance on document processing and scheduling.
Absolutely. Clerical and administrative support roles are extremely vulnerable. Think data entry clerks, executive assistants handling scheduling, routine support staff. Projections suggest an estimated 7.5 million of these jobs could be lost globally by 2027. AI is simply faster, cheaper, and more accurate at processing structured information. And the displacement is rapidly accelerating into white-collar knowledge work, too, which is a shock for many. Retail, specifically cashiers, face about a 65% automation risk. But the real shock is in fields previously considered quite insulated. Accounting and financial services are exposed due to AI's capacity for routine auditing, compliance checks, preliminary reporting, and we've seen widespread layoffs already across media, marketing, and even legal professions as AI systems take over content generation, basic reporting, and things like legal discovery.
I was particularly struck by the demographic impact our sources highlighted. It's often assumed, I think, that maybe older workers are the most vulnerable to technological change, but the data suggests younger workers are also being hit very hard.
That's a critical nuance, yes. Younger tech workers and recent college graduates are facing higher unemployment rates specifically because those entry-level jobs, the traditional roles where you gain experience, learn the ropes, pay your dues, right? Those are often the first to be automated. An AI system can handle the basic research, the data scrubbing tasks that a recent graduate used to do. This means unemployment among, say, 20 to 30-year-olds in these tech-exposed fields has seen significant spikes. It's creating a serious bottleneck for career initiation, which could have long-term consequences.
Okay, so we have this huge wave of workers being displaced, meeting enormous immediate need for highly specialized new talent. What is the actual educational barrier to entry for those new roles? How high is it?
Well, the new roles are heavily concentrated in areas that design, deploy, and manage the AI infrastructure itself. So AI engineers, data compliance experts, complex system architects, prompt designers who specialize in maximizing AI output, and of course the energy sector also needs complex talent to build and manage all the renewable energy and data center physical infrastructure we were just talking about. But the educational barrier is immense. The vast majority of these emerging high-value roles require advanced education. Master's degrees seem to be the norm for something like 77% of current openings, according to the sources. Now, for a worker displaced from, say, a clerical job, who maybe lacks a foundational STEM degree, that leap represents years of potentially very costly education and retraining. It's not trivial. This severely limits the absorption of displaced workers back into the labor market and is a primary driver of social instability and rising inequality.
That really explains why the public is so anxious, doesn't it? I mean, if the promise is, oh, don't worry, we'll create better jobs, but the reality is, yeah, but you need a master's degree to even apply for them, then the public doesn't see job creation. They see structural exclusion.
Exactly. That structural exclusion is what fuels the public anxiety. It's really no wonder that AI experts surveyed are far more positive about AI's impact, about 56% predicting a positive impact overall. Compare that to the public, where only 17% hold that same positive prediction. The experts are likely secure in their highly skilled, advanced roles. The general public is watching this automation wave crash onto their current income stability, and they're understandably worried.
This kind of crisis seems to demand some radical policy thinking then, to manage the transition and maintain social cohesion. What sort of ideas are emerging to try and absorb this shock?
Well, one major concept being actively discussed, and it pops up in several sources, is the idea of a modified universal basic income, or UBI system. Now, traditional UBI usually means granting a baseline income to absolutely everyone, regardless of need or employment status. The modified system, as discussed in our sources, focuses more specifically on managing the inevitable structural unemployment caused directly by automation. The goal isn't necessarily to encourage total unemployment, but rather to stabilize the system during this rapid transition. It would potentially allow workers to be released part-time or maybe even full-time from traditional employment, perhaps working a 20-hour week instead of 40, while still maintaining a guaranteed stable income floor. Think of it as a policy safety valve, absorbing the shock of structural unemployment without allowing mass poverty to set in, which would otherwise threaten social order as AI rapidly takes over more and more tasks. It's being framed as a pragmatic response to the sheer speed of technological displacement.
A safety valve. That's
Yeah.
an interesting way to put it. Okay, let's move into section 3, future-proofing careers and human capacity. The conversation for every listener, I guess, now shifts from, will AI take my job, to, okay, how do I secure employment from myself, maybe for my children? Given this inevitable rapid shift, how do we future-proof our careers?
We can draw some pretty clear lines from the source material on this. Jobs that are likely to survive, and maybe even thrive, seem to share three core characteristics that AI and robotics currently just cannot replicate well. First, they require uniquely human skills, like deep empathy or complex social negotiation. Second, they involve physical dexterity and adaptability in unpredictable, changing environments. Or third, they demand high levels of trust and nuanced ethical judgment.
Okay, let's break down the most resilient career areas based on those characteristics. What comes out on top?
First, roles centered around care and empathy. Think healthcare and social care. Nurses, mental health professionals, primary school teachers, geriatric specialists. These roles are relatively safe because they rely on complex, non-linear human decision-making combined with that necessary empathy, relational support, and high emotional intelligence. AI can maybe help with diagnosis, sure, but it cannot comfort a patient, motivate a student, or navigate a complex family crisis. Not in the same way.
Right, that human touch remains critical.
Absolutely. Second, the physical dexterity professions, what we often call the skilled trades. Electricians, plumbers, HVAC technicians, specialized manufacturing technicians, carpenters. These people have to adapt constantly to unique job sites. A leaky pipe hidden behind a wall, a unique fault in an old electrical panel, a bespoke construction problem that's never been seen before. They require advanced manual dexterity and a deep contextual understanding of the physical world. Robotics, while excellent in highly structured factory settings, still lags significantly in that kind of contextual understanding and advanced, fine motor dexterity needed for unpredictable real-world environments.
That's such a powerful point, isn't it? That the perceived old economy trades are actually fundamentally resistant to automation,
Yeah.
precisely because the job site itself is constantly non-standardized.
Exactly. The human ability to generalize from one messy, unpredictable situation to the next messy situation is still completely unmatched by machines. Third, jobs requiring judgment and intuition will likely be protected for a long time. This includes things like emergency services, specialized first responders, where snap decisions under pressure are key. It also includes highly creative and strategic roles artists, high-end designers, composers, strategic planners, where human intuition, taste, and a feel for the zeitgeist remain the final arbiters of value. And finally, roles centered on ethics and nuance. Think specialized legal professionals dealing with complex cases, advanced cybersecurity experts defending against novel threats, strategic military planners making irreversible high-stakes decisions. Human oversight and ethical judgment are crucial and, frankly, non-negotiable in these areas.
Okay, so if being more human, in a sense, and also technically adept in the physical world is the path forward, what are the necessary education and training shifts we need to be making today?
Well, the entire focus of education probably needs to pivot. moving away from rote memorization and basic data processing tasks that AI handles perfectly well, and towards inherently human capabilities. We need much more intensive training in emotional intelligence communication, empathy, active listening, conflict resolution. These are absolutely essential for those growing care and teaching roles. We need to prioritize critical thinking and judgment under uncertainty, maybe taught through scenario based learning, philosophy, ethics classes. This is vital for roles requiring diagnosis, complex problem solving, or emergency response. Crucially, we must revitalize hands on technical proficiency. This means a massive societal reinvestment in vocational training, apprenticeships, industry recognized certifications for all those skilled trades we just talked about. We need to make these careers desirable again and accessible. And finally, we need robust programs focused squarely on ethics and judgment, ensuring that the next generation of professionals, from doctors to data scientists to policymakers, are deeply instilled with human values and a strong sense of social responsibility regarding technology.
It sounds like we need almost an ethical revolution in education, alongside the technical one. But there was a fascinating and maybe slightly worrying finding in the sources, particularly from an Elon University study. It looked at the expected changes to core human traits by 2035 due to AI reliance. If we rely on AI to enhance us, what does it potentially do to the very things we're saying we need to protect, our deep human capacity?
Yeah, that study presented a very sober, cautionary view. The experts surveyed predicted that our increasing reliance on AI might bring mostly negative changes to 9 essential human traits by 2035. This included potential declines in our social intelligence because real-world interactions might decrease, our capacity to think deeply about complex concepts, as AI often handles the heavy cognitive lifting for us. Also, trust in widely shared norms could erode, partly due to deepfakes and algorithmic bias. Empathy and moral judgment might lessen. Our mental well-being could suffer. Our sense of agency, the belief that we actually control our actions, might diminish. And even our sense of identity and purpose and our confidence in our own native intellectual abilities could be impacted negatively.
That is a deeply worrying prediction, that the very technology designed to augment us could instead potentially erode our capacity for independent thought and our fundamental sense of self-worth. Why would relying on AI make us lose our capacity to think deeply? What's the mechanism there?
Well, the experts in that study argue it's largely a function of cognitive outsourcing. If AI is always available instantly to summarize complex information or perform difficult calculations, the human brain might simply atrophy in those areas. It doesn't get the workout it needs. Just as, GPS and navigation systems reduced our need to retain detailed mental maps, AI might reduce our need to really struggle with ambiguity or complexity. This avoidance of mental struggle, which is arguably the core of deep thought, could lead to a measurable decline in our intellectual muscle. Furthermore, that loss of agency comes from increasingly opaque AI systems making critical life decisions for us. What news you see, what job you might be offered, maybe even what medical diagnosis you receive. If the decisions feel increasingly external and mysterious, you naturally feel less control over your own life trajectory.
That really is the profound challenge of our age, isn't it? Technology potentially making us less capable of handling the complexity it creates.
But there were areas of optimism in that study too, weren't there? Areas where AI was seen as a potential net positive for human traits. Absolutely. It wasn't all doom and gloom. Experts were generally optimistic about potential improvements in a few key areas. One was curiosity and our capacity to learn, precisely because access to information becomes almost frictionless with AI. Another was decision-making and problem-solving, particularly when AI handles the preliminary data analysis, freeing up humans for higher-level judgment. And interestingly, innovative thinking and creativity were also seen as potentially benefiting. The underlying philosophy here is that AI could remove the tedious burdens of research, calculation, drafting, and so on, thus freeing up the human mind to operate at a higher, more strategic, and more conceptual level. The expectation, or maybe the hope, is that humans will become hyper-curious, focusing less on how to calculate something and more on what radical new question they should ask next.
Okay, let's zoom out again. Section 4, growth, limits, in the globalized world.
Right. We need to pull back now and connect this whole AI, human capacity, and jobs discussion to the largest possible global context. AI's energy demands and the subsequent social stress on the job market don't exist in a vacuum. They fit almost perfectly into Thomas Friedman's well-known framework, which he laid out years ago to describe the converging global challenges we face. A world that is fundamentally hot, flat, and crowded.
Okay, let's use his structure to frame this AI dilemma we're discussing. What does hot refer to in this new age of AI-driven energy demand?
Hot refers directly to the climate crisis accelerating, which, as we've discussed, AI threatens to worsen significantly if it's not managed with clean energy. Friedman talked about global weirding, meaning increasingly unpredictable, disruptive climate change events. And we are absolutely seeing that realized now with unprecedented frequency. Record-breaking temperatures, prolonged droughts, catastrophic flooding. All of this disrupts energy systems and global supply chains. This means that resource stress isn't some future threat anymore. It is an immediate operational reality that forces geopolitical tension and economic instability right now.
And flat seems to be exactly what we just discussed in the job market section, isn't it?
Precisely. Flat refers to technological globalization leveling economies and opportunities, or perhaps flattening the value of certain types of labor, which is exactly what the AI boom is doing, but at hyperspeed. The rapid, almost borderless spread of AI technology flattens global competition, allowing firms anywhere to potentially access world-class computational tools. But crucially, this flattens the workforce too, simultaneously increasing inequality between those who can master the technology, remember the 77% with master's degrees, and the massive swaths of the population who risk being displaced by it.
And then there's the pressure cooker of crowded.
Crowded, yes. That refers to the explosive population growth, which has now surged well past 8 billion people globally. This drives intense, often unsustainable pressure on basic resources like water, food, and energy. These 8 billion people, quite understandably, all aspire to rising standards of living. But that aspiration directly conflicts with the ecological limits of a hot world that's already under strain. So these three pressures interlock. AI intensifies the demand for energy in a hot world while simultaneously flattening the job market for a crowded global population. And this leads to several major cascading global problems.
Such as the economic impact on the energy producers themselves, maybe.
Yes, exactly. We could see massive wealth transfers back towards oil-rich regimes if energy costs spike significantly to meet this combined global demand plus the new AI demand. That could potentially undermine the stability of democracies that rely on stable energy prices. We are also seeing accelerating biodiversity loss, which threatens the essential ecosystem services humanity fundamentally relies on for survival. And critically, persistent energy poverty remains a huge issue. Over 1 billion people still lack reliable access to power. Their ability to transition to cleaner energy and develop economically is further hampered when global AI demand drives up costs and potentially redirects clean energy investments towards wealthy tech hubs instead of developing nations.
This overwhelming set of pressures, it naturally leads us to question the very foundation of modern economics, doesn't it? Which is this core belief in perpetual economic growth. It feels almost impossible to reconcile AI's hyperproductivity with the reality of finite planetary limits. And this is where Peter Victor's arguments in his book, Managing Without Growth, become so incredibly relevant.
Victor fundamentally challenges the core concept of GDP growth as the central policy objective, especially for the rich developed nations, which, let's face it, are the primary drivers of AI development and its massive infrastructure demand.
Okay, so why does he argue that rich countries should deliberately consider moving away from prioritizing growth? What's the first core reason he gives?
The first reason is brutally simple: ecological limits. Victor argues, quite persuasively, that continued economic growth in wealthy nations is now physically unsustainable. Developed economies already consume a vastly disproportionate share of global resources and energy. Any further expansion in these already affluent nations leaves virtually no ecological headroom for essential climate mitigation efforts
Right.
or for necessary equitable development in poorer countries. Growth, in a material sense, becomes a mathematical impossibility on a finite planet, particularly for those who are already rich.
Right, so we basically hit the physical ceiling, or very close to it. What about the argument concerning quality of life in those rich countries?
That's his second key reason: diminishing returns. The data strongly suggests that in affluent, developed societies, additional economic growth past a certain high threshold no longer reliably correlates with rising happiness, improved social cohesion, or better overall well-being indicators. People might get slightly richer on paper, but they aren't necessarily healthier, happier, or living more fulfilling lives. Therefore, we are burning vast amounts of precious resources, making the hot world even hotter, for increasingly marginal, maybe even questionable, societal gain. The cost-benefit analysis for more growth in the developed world simply doesn't hold up anymore, he argues.
And his third argument directly challenges the political dogma that growth is somehow essential for social health, for things like jobs.
Precisely. Victor argues that growth is not actually necessary for achieving crucial social goals like full employment, reducing inequality, or eliminating poverty even within our current systems. He uses detailed economic modeling to show that these aims can be achieved under conditions of zero or perhaps very minimal growth. The key, he suggests, is shifting the entire policy focus away from simply expanding the overall economic pie towards making deliberate, systemic policy changes regarding how the existing pie is distributed and how work itself is structured in society.
Okay, so if we accept, even hypothetically, the idea of managing without prioritizing endless growth, what alternative policies does Victor propose? How can we handle the high productivity of AI and still ensure social stability and well-being?
His proposals are often seen as radical by mainstream economics, but they are rooted in principles of equity and ecological sustainability. First, he suggests significantly shortened work weeks, perhaps reducing the standard work week down to 30 or 32 hours, maybe even less eventually. The idea is to distribute the available necessary work more broadly across the workforce, directly managing the job displacement caused by AI-driven hyperproductivity. This also has the co-benefit of simultaneously reducing overall resource consumption as people generally consume less when they work less. Second, he advocates for shifting the tax burden radically, moving it away from taxing labor, which we actually want to encourage people to do, the necessary work, and putting it much more heavily onto environmental externalities, pollution, carbon emissions, resource depletion. This makes sustainable choices the default, economically rational choice, and it heavily incentivizes the clean energy transition required to run AI sustainably. And third, he strongly supports direct redistribution programs and investing in robust public services like healthcare, education, transit to address poverty and inequality immediately and directly, rather than just waiting for the often mythical trickle-down effects of macroeconomic growth, which often don't materialize for those at the bottom.
Shortened work weeks, taxing pollution, not payroll, direct redistribution. It's definitely a different vision. Okay, let's bring this all together in Section 5. 4 Futures of Globalization. How we respond to all this pressure.
Right. So if we connect this whole AI, jobs, energy, and anti-growth discussion to the biggest geopolitical picture possible, we are essentially, as a global society, choosing the future path of global cooperation, or lack thereof. The World Economic Forum, in some of their recent work, identified a useful framework. They outlined 4 possible trajectories for globalization based on how we collectively choose to manage 2 distinct kinds of flows across borders. First, physical integration, that's the movement of goods, energy, physical capital, even people. And second, virtual integration, that's the flow of technology, data, digital services, intellectual property. How open or closed we are on these 2 axes determines our global future.
Okay, this framework sounds like a really excellent tool for categorizing the potential global responses to those triple pressures of the hot, flat, and crowded world we discussed. Let's look at the optimal path first, the one that might leverage AI's power most positively. Total integration on both fronts.
That is scenario 1. Globalization 5.0, sometimes called reconnection. This represents the path of strong physical and strong virtual integration. In this future, nations actively work to strengthen international alliances. Supply chains diversify, not just for pure cost efficiency anymore, but for resilience and security. There's an accelerated, globally coordinated shift to renewables, perhaps driven by shared geopolitical goals and climate agreements. Talent, capital, and data move relatively freely across borders, facilitated by things like international standardization of data regulations and digital trade norms. And crucially, in this scenario, governments proactively invest heavily in robust social safety nets, maybe including things like that modified UBI we discussed, and in massive human capital development programs, reskilling, education, specifically aiming to mitigate the inequality caused by previous waves of globalization and cushion the shock of the current AI transition. This is the scenario envisioned to drive inclusive and sustainable growth globally.
Okay, that sounds ideal. But what happens if the physical world splinters? Maybe due to geopolitical conflict, resource scarcity, or climate stress? But the digital world, the virtual world, remains highly connected and maybe even thrives.
That leads us to scenario 3, digital dominance, or sometimes called agile platforms. This is a path characterized by physical fragmentation but continued, strong virtual integration. In this world, manufacturing and physical trade tend to localize, often consolidating into strategic geopolitical blocs. Think maybe a US-Europe bloc versus a China-Russia aligned bloc, for example. This creates significant risks of prolonged supply shortages for physical goods, potential trade wars between blocs, and a resulting cost of living crisis for many, because physical goods should become harder and more expensive to move across these new divides. However, technology platforms, digital services, software, and AI systems continue to thrive globally, largely unconstrained by physical borders. Intangibles like AI algorithms, data flows, and intellectual property gain massive economic importance, partially offsetting the physical economic losses, but mainly for the highly skilled virtual workforce.
Hmm. That sounds like potentially a dream scenario for the sort of virtual elite, but maybe a nightmare for the majority of the physical workforce.
Precisely. The global high-skilled talent market, software engineers, AI specialists, data scientists, digital creatives, they benefit hugely because they can often work remotely across borders, selling their AI-augmented services into a global marketplace. But geographically bound workers, those in lower-skilled manufacturing, local services, resource extraction, agriculture, they tend to suffer immensely from restricted movement, limited physical trade opportunities, and often limited access to participate fully in the burgeoning digital economy. You see the rise of anything as a service models benefiting the virtual economy, but the physical economy struggles with bottlenecks, increasing divergence in industrial quality between blocks, and maybe even the risk of deindustrialization in poorer economies that get locked out of the main blocks.
Okay, and what is the absolute worst-case trajectory then? The scenario we absolutely must strive to avoid. Total fragmentation across both dimensions, physical and virtual.
That, unfortunately, is scenario 4. Autarkic world, also called systemic fragmentation. This means deep fragmentation in both the physical and the virtual space. In this future, countries turn almost completely inward. They prioritize national economic independence, autarky, and actively decouple from international systems, both physical trade and digital networks. This leads almost inevitably to economic stagnation, increased sovereign debt risk as global trade slows to a trickle, and probably a reduction in the quality and innovation of global industrial output due to the lack of shared knowledge and competition. Critically, in this scenario, global cooperation on climate change basically collapses. Climate standards are abandoned in a race for national energy security, reliance on domestic, often carbon-heavy fuels increases dramatically, and the overall lack of global cooperation accelerates environmental degradation for everyone. Living standards fall globally. Political instability rises, increasing the propensity for conflict and authoritarianism. This scenario genuinely results in the greatest loss of opportunity, security, and human potential for pretty much everyone on the planet.
The power of this framework, I think, is that regardless of which scenario you personally feel is most likely right now, the WEF identified certain no-regret moves. These are actions that decision makers, governments, businesses should probably take now because they enhance global stability and ensure better outcomes, regardless of which specific future scenario ultimately unfolds. What are those core non-negotiables?
Yes, 3 main strategic actions stand out as essential buffers against instability, whatever the future holds. First, achieving long-term economic resilience must be driven fundamentally through integration, sharing, and diversification, not through isolationism and protectionism. Regional cooperation is absolutely key to building resilient supply chains without resorting to complete damaging fragmentation. Second, global cooperation is utterly essential to manage the shared climate crisis. No single nation, not even the largest, can solve the hot world problem or handle those potential 1.7 gigatons of extra AI emissions alone. It requires collective action. And third, massive, sustained, targeted investments in human capital development. That means training, upskilling, lifelong learning, quality education for all are mandatory. This is crucial to manage the explosive inequality potentially driven by AI and to adapt the workforce to the changing realities of any future scenario, whether it's fragmentation or globalization 5.0.
Okay, let's try and wrap this up.
So let's just synthesize the true gravity, perhaps, of what we've deep dived into today. AI demands an extraordinary escalating amount of power. That power demand strains the planet and our existing energy infrastructure, confirming the tough realities of Thomas Friedman's hot world. The resulting economic shockwaves shift our core assumptions about employment, compelling us to seriously consider radical solutions like modified UBI, and as Peter Victor powerfully argues, forcing rich countries in particular to fundamentally rethink the very nature, the very goal of economic growth itself. The policy choices we make literally today, tomorrow, this year on energy infrastructure, on workforce transition, on global cooperation, they will determine which of those global future scenarios we actually fall into. The resilient, hopefully prosperous Globalization 5.0, or the stagnant, dangerous, autarkic world.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate this? We know, looking back, that the historical progress of truly transformative technology seems basically unstoppable. Our sources noted that humans have never successfully suppressed or denied a fundamentally productive technology in the long run. And if the leaders developing these AI systems, the people at the cutting edge, are predicting that AI could match the collective intelligence of maybe a country of geniuses as early as 2026 or 2027, well, the challenge is not far off. It's immediate. The core question then shifts entirely from can we stop AI, which seems unlikely, to something much deeper fundamentally. Can humanity, facing these undeniable finite planetary limits, adapt its social and economic systems? Our deeply ingrained ideas about work, income, consumption, status, and growth, can we adapt those systems fast enough to successfully absorb our own astonishing technological progress without succumbing to systemic fragmentation, massive inequality, and potentially irreversible environmental collapse? That, I think, is the profound human and policy challenge that this deep dive into the source material really presents to all of us. We have the tools, perhaps, in AI itself. But do we, collectively, have the wisdom and the political will to restructure society at the speed of the algorithm? Something to think about.